Okay, so let's start from the beginning, yes? Well, what I mean by that, let me just, sparkle your imagination and maybe draw your attention here with some what else but fine classical example. And well, probably you all heard about famous Akiba Rubinstein. He was amazing player, but also endgame virtuoso. And yes, first I will be starting with pawn endgames, and I will be showing you some very instructive pawn endgames, which yes, as I said, from practical point of view. So what it means, we will see from some normal position which is taken actually from the game, yes, how you can steer the game into some of the more standard or going toward standard positions. Also, what is all about pawn endgames? Well, basically, you know already that for the fact usually in a pawn endgame, if you have a pawn endgame on the board, you are winning or losing, or it's a draw. I mean, you can't say for some pawn endgame I am just slightly better or something like that. In pawn endgames, usually you go into the pawn endgame if you want to win or if you want to make draw. Sometimes it's also possible, yes, but not very often, that you somehow go into the pawn endgame just to save yourself. But that doesn't happen very often. Usually we want to trade off some pieces and go into the pure pawn endgame if you're sure that you can really capitalize on your advantage and get the full point. In order to do that, and that's the cleanest way usually, well, basically, you know how we learn all in chess school from the beginning. They tell you immediately, okay, if you're stronger, if you have better position, more material, just exchange everything and win in the pawn endgame, yes? That's the easiest part, if you can, of course. Usually in a normal game of chess, your opponent will, he will be trying to resist, in so many different ways, usually, but the cleanest way to win is just transposition to the winning pawn endgame. And how can you know if a pawn endgame is winning or not if you don't have your theoretical knowledge? That's why knowledge of endgames is very important. And not only that, I mean, if you face a position like this, and basically here, if you believe me, black was Rubinstein was playing with black pieces against Kohn. And the game is from Chigorin Memorial, which was played in St. Petersburg, 1909. So, if you have a position like this, you might be thinking, okay, it looks equal. Okay, white has double pawns, but how can you attack? How can you do something about, for example, pawn on h2 or these double pawns? It looks like there is nothing to be done, and maybe even some normal, modern day engine would say position is about equal. But it's things are not so simple, especially in practical play. And I will not be using too much, engines analysis. I will be okay. Maybe sometimes I will use them just to check something or not, and then I will, of course, tell you obviously what the engine shows. But my approach in this Endgame masterclass is more sort of a classical approach let's see what those old masters, grandmasters, how they were thinking, and let's check some very important chess chess facts and chess knowledge. So here basically if black wants to just shuffle the pieces a little bit, you can't really make use of these pawns. And then Rubinstein, being virtuoso, amazing endgame virtuoso, he just plays knight c4. Okay, white takes, why not? And now we have rook endgame. Maybe you're asking yourself, well, what is this rook endgame? It's not pawn endgame. Okay, but let's just wait. Here, well, objectively, we might say that after some move like f4, position looks indeed equalish. Yes, indeed it looks equalish, but still, I mean, white has to be careful. So, if you're an engine, amazingly strong engine, maybe it's not a problem. But I'm here, showing you this. And this practical knowledge is applicable if you're playing against humans. So, a man against man, yes, not man against machine. If you're playing against engine, that's a different story, especially engine which has a table base. And nowadays we have, table base with 7 men, so 7 pieces table base, famous Lomonosov table base. So, well, it's not easy if you play against engine. But here, okay, Rubinstein was playing against Kohn, and now maybe Kohn was a little bit concerned about very famous Rubinstein technique, and then okay, maybe rook h4 is coming, maybe he's going to harass him a little bit, coming with the king and so on. Yeah, there are many ways. So Kohn decides to play rook c1, and this is where this knowledge is very, very important. I don't want to say that Kohn didn't know his stuff. I don't want to say that Kohn didn't know endgames. Of course that he knew endgames, and of course that he was good player. Otherwise he wouldn't be invited in Chigorn Memorial in St. Petersburg. But here, basically, he just makes huge blunder. Rook c1 is just a blunder. And why? Now, in this endgame, when we had the knight and bishop on the board, it was almost impossible to, pinpoint the weakness of those pawns on the king side. But now, in rook endgame, maybe it was some idea somewhere in the air. But now, when Kohn gives up, he gives up a lot of ground, if you want to put it that way. Actually, he's giving black this opportunity to immediately enter with the king, and that's really a bad thing to do. So Rubinstein correctly assesses things, and of course here the thing is, maybe Kohn was happy to exchange, because then it's pure pawn endgame, equal number of pawns, and maybe he was just hoping that he would just make draw, because now black can't avoid rook exchange. But okay, takes, king takes, and now we have pure pawn endgame. Here, so here in this particular pawn endgame, if we imagine that this pawn is maybe on g2 or g3, position would be just a draw, probably. Yeah, although this king is closer to the center than white's king. But okay, let's say that it looks like white would have decent chances to make draw. Probably it would be a draw. But now, having those double pawns and very weak h2 pawn, now Rubinstein shows fine technique. Immediately he starts his march, king f6. Now white really doesn't have, white doesn't have time to try and go for some silly road like the, he really doesn't have time. So For example, playing something like king d3, something like this is simply not enough. I mean, white simply doesn't have time. Even b5 is possible now, probably. And only then h4 and h3 and okay. So black wins. You get the picture, yes? So this is not possible. So white has to hurry. And maybe he saw this. Maybe he calculated that he will reach g1 square in time. And maybe he thought, okay, that's enough. But what happened? King e2, king h4. So you see, it was straightforward line for black king. So black king goes, you know, with lightning speed to the, you know, he immediately attacks weaknesses on the king side. And now after king f1, king h3, king g1, now we get to this position, and as we can see, a lot has changed. So in some endgame which was on the board before this pawn endgame, it was obviously not possible to do this, because first of all white had a bishop, yes? He would be playing bishop f1 check, something else. But also in a rook endgame, you know, black king couldn't march so quickly. White would always have some rook g1 check something, yes? So this was possible only in a pawn endgame. And if you remember, you know, if you really remember this example and some ideas which are used here, then you might use it in your own games. And I will show you later why and how it works. So here, obviously, we have king on h3, which is very active, and king on g1, which is quite passive. And basically, king on g1 doesn't have too many squares. I mean, white is simply pinned to the defense of the h2 pawn. So he really has to wait passively. And believe me, if something is bad in chess, that is usually, you know, if you have to wait passively, that's a bad sign. And if you can obtain a position where your opponent doesn't have anything, but he is forced to passively wait, usually, I mean always, almost always, that's a good idea for you. And then something will usually come up. And as we know also in life, you know, being too passive, okay, sometimes you just need to you know, wait and wait that the storm passes, like in chess. But being too passive in chess is bad thing, also like in life, yes. So too much passivity is almost never good idea. I think that's a good point to remember. So e5, unless you find a fortress. And there are, you know, there are those positions which are fortresses. You can find them in many books, in many, you know, instructive videos. So fortress is a very, very important theme. But here, white doesn't have fortress. That's his problem. e5 is a very, very nice move. Why? It restricts this pawn. So white is now losing, you know, tempi, and he is losing mobility of these pawns. f3 and f2 pawns are sort of stuck. And now black has many pawn moves. So black is going to take every tempo which he wants, which he needs, basically. If white is advancing with a4, if he tries something, black will block him. So here, first thing is that black has very active king, and second thing is that he has many pawn tempi. Sometimes you don't have to, you know, you don't need so many tempi to win a pawn endgame. Sometimes only one critical tempo is enough to win. But here black has, you know, big cushion with those tempi. So what happened now? After e5, I mean, white can play e4, or f4 is obviously just losing. He is not allowed to do that, so he decides to wait. If he goes, for example, e4, I'll just give you a sample line. Let me just show you a sample line. g5 is possible. Now, whole king side is completely blocked, and black has you know, as many tempi as he likes. Now white has to wait. Nothing changes if he plays some move like b5, b6 is coming, and so on. So now this, something like this, g4, what to do, take, what else, takes, check. That's why black needed his pawn on h4, check, and now black wins. I mean, black will win the, you know, the e4 pawn, and so on and so on. Black is completely winning. So white decides to wait, but then simply b5. Okay, now whole white structure is blocked. I mean, white has only one move. I mean, he can play e4 if he likes. f4 is immediately losing. So now b5, black has so many tempi. White is simply forced to wait. f5, why not? g5, why not? h5, why not? I mean, let's just take a look at this position. This is amazing, right? And this is just, you know, how many moves? Just around 10 moves after this scenario. Black played knight c4, check, in, you know, some relatively harmful looking position, you know, and this position looks like it should be equal or around equal, but after just 10 moves we arrived into this position, and black is now completely dominating and completely winning. King h1, g4, of course. Now well, white doesn't have too much choice what to do. For example, he played e4. For example, if he takes f4, something like this, yes. And okay, what to do? If he takes, king g3 is coming. So something like this, and simply pawn endgame is lost. Black will win both pawns on the king side. So white tries desperately to play this move, but then just fe4. gf3 is probably also winning. I mean, try to z3, yes. No, but this is, sorry. So this is basically, this would be a problem. White would win this. So yeah, you have to, you know, you have to pay attention. So this would be simply losing. So even if you're black, even if you have dominating position, be careful, because now if you play a move like gf3, you might lose. King g1, and now e3, fe3, and this pawn is winning. So you have to be careful, you have to be precise. So if you're handling some pawn endgame, first of all, you need to know when to transpose to the pawn endgame, and then in order to handle the endgame correctly, you know, then you need some knowledge and you need to be precise, which means precise calculation. That's also one feature of those pawn endgames. If you have sharp and accurate calculation, that helps a lot. And also, training pawn endgames will also improve your calculation ability. So aside of solving tactical puzzles and positions, which is good for your calculation skills, also you know, training pawn endgames also helps. So here, taking on e4, h4, and now you can see this is standard technique in those positions. If you didn't know this, now you can remember. You should remember this. Simply, white doesn't know what to do. If he tries f3, it will not help him. And now, for example, this is possible line, and okay, white can resign. Or, for example, if he tries to play a move like f3, that is not going to help. For example, something like this, f4 this, and now, I mean, black can simply win in a very nice way. Mate. This is also one of those ideas. Mate with those two pawns. So yes, basically, please remember what happens in a position like this, what might happen, yes? simply your opponent might be punished if he is too optimistic to try and make draw in a position like this. You can punish him if you know your endgames. Let's check next example. Okay, so here is our next example, and this is from one of my own games. I was white. The game is from year 1999. I was not a grandmaster. I was rated around 2300 FIDE, and my opponent was not very well known, Jordanov. And now, okay, I'm not claiming that I'm Rubinstein or something similar. Of course not. But of course, knowledge from those classical examples helps if you know something about that. And here I simply decided to go bishop g6 because it was obvious to me that if I play some normal moves, it would be very difficult to do something, and black allowed me to go into this endgame, and now black is simply forced to exchange. As you can see, white is deciding. So if you have white pieces in a position like this, you can decide what to do. Do you want to wait a little bit? Obviously, black might play knight e5 next move, but you can wait one move, or you can go immediately to the pawn endgame. And I went immediately. Now he has double pawns, and as we have seen from a Rubinstein example, as I said, I'm not Rubinstein, but you can try to use the weakness of those pawns. And how? Exactly going to block. And now if I manage to play king g5, this would be even better than Rubinstein example, because black can't really defend his g6 pawn easily, yes? In previous example, his Rubinstein opponent Kohn, he could play king g1, king h1 and wait. But here, if I manage to go king g5, I'm just winning, yes? So my opponent just played king f6, but then h4, and now he's sort of in Zugzwang. It's very important for pawn endgames. Please remember that. Active king, of course, we know that from Capablanca, yes, from his book, famous book. So just get your king in the center, yes. So in the pawn endgame, go to the center, and almost in any endgame with not many pieces on the board, your king should strive for center. So very active king and spare pawn moves, which means pawn tempi, especially in pawn endgames. That's important. Now if black tries to somehow play a6, a5, I mean, I will block him easily, yes, without any problems, and then I will get a pawn. I mean, I will get a tempo, and basically I will force him into Zugzwang. And Zugzwang is a very powerful weapon, so please remember that. In almost all sorts of endgames, Zugzwang is a very, very important, powerful tool. What is Zugzwang? If you don't know, basically that's a position where your opponent is he's on the move and he doesn't have a good move. So basically you force your position in a situation or in a position where he can't move. He doesn't have a good move. He has to give ground, so give you some space, or he has to give up material or some important square, and so on and so on. Sometimes you use Zugzwang just to improve your positional advantage, maybe from a small to bigger one, or from big one to the completely winning advantage, and sometimes, just to finish the job. Yeah, like here, okay. So black is still not yet in a real Zugzwang. He can play one or two moves on the queen side, but it's inevitable. So he decides to take the bull by the horns, but yes, basically it doesn't help. He's just lost. I say, okay, thank you, now I'm pawn up. Well, it's a double pawn, but it's a pawn. Now he could play king g6, but still then he would have to give more ground. Then I need to decide, do I want to go g4 or do I want to play king g4 and just force him further back? And okay, eventually I would be winning this. It's always a good idea to save extra tempi with your pawns, that this is a good technique in pawn endgames. My opponent play king e6, I say okay, g6, let's go. You might ask me, why g6, why should I do that? But now you should be careful, this was very clever try by my opponent. If I try king e4 and just saying, okay, I'm pawn up and I have so many tempi, but sometimes, he might go g6 and then he just can play king d6, king e6, and sometimes, you should remember this and don't allow your opponent something like this if you're realizing your advantage. Sometimes even if he's short on tempi, he might set up sort of fortress with his pawns and the king. And now, for example, after some a4, a5, b3, I have tempi and I have even two more, but it doesn't help. He's just going to make draw. Just like that. So you have to be careful. You have to be careful when doing this. Okay, so g6 was the only way, and now I'm simply entering with the king. My opponent has to give ground, so he plays king f6, king e4. He has to take. What else? I mean, okay, he can play this, but now b3, a3. Obviously, he will be in zugzwang. a4, takes a, and this king f5, and he just resigned. As I said, you don't have to be Rubinstein to win these sort of endgames. You just need to learn from Rubinstein and those old great masters. Okay, so let's check our next example. Okay, so here is our next example, and here we have interesting situation. This is also one of my old games from 2003, and my opponent was FIDE Master Sekil. I was white, and I think I was rated around 2400. So still not the Grandmaster, yes, but I was International Master. Here, as you can see, I have a passed pawn, and my opponent has double pawns on the queen side. Usually that would be advantage, because usually it's not easy for black to make a passed pawn on the queen side. Yes, my 3 pawns are almost stopping those pawns, and on the king side I have a passer on e5. But still, position is not easy. I mean, white is better obviously, but still it's not easy to realize the advantage. So black should definitely try a move like c4, something like that, and he might be able to fight, to fight for some decent counterplay. It's not easy for white, yes, but for some reason so you have to be careful, even if your opponent has double pawns, but if they are not fixed, and if other position of other pieces is not favorable to you, sometimes it's not really easy. Like here, after c4, black would get very decent counterplay, but he makes critical mistake, bishop f8. And because I learned something from Rubinstein and those old masters and those old classical examples, I realized that the best bet, if you want to say it in that way, the best chance for white to do something in this game is to just go straight into the pawn endgame. So I took first, and now, okay, still you still have time if you have white pieces here. This is another critical position. You have time to think, do I want to go to the to the pawn endgame, or I want to continue in the rook endgame. So even move like rook c3 should be decent, but after something like c4, bc, d4, black will get some counterplay, you know. And with best play, black should be able to hold this. Of course, it's not straightforward, but he should be able to hold. White is obviously pawn up, but black has very good drawing chances. And if rook d3, d4, and yes, black is somehow holding here. Yeah. So basically, the best try rook f8, and now we are. It's not like Rubinstein endgame, and it's not always the same, you know. But usually, the less pieces on the board you have, it's easier to make use of those pawn weaknesses in your opponent's camp. That also goes for isolated pawn, but that's another story. And here we are dealing with double pawns. And now I really can't reach h6, obviously. But my idea was simply to get the king up the board. Now I will defend my pawn, and it's basically, it will be, you know, I will be acting like I have a pawn up. And this is already passer, and black can't force passed pawn on the queen side. So his best try here was just to go g5. But as I said, I'm not claiming that this is a winning position for white, but this is the best try from practical point of view. This is the best try for white to go and play for win. So best try for black was just to go g5, and now to try with this. Obviously he can't allow me to go to f5. So something like this was the best try for black, and then just to make some counterplay. And here in this endgame, well, black has obviously counterplay. This is queen endgame on the board. White is, so this is always complex when you have a position like this. And one possible line could be, this is all the analysis. We don't have to analyze this too much. Obviously, you can see that black has serious counterplay and very good drawing chances. So here, a possible line could be something like this. Now, black can't really take the h-pawn, you know, that's very important. Black is not allowed to take h-pawn with check. And and if he plays something like king a2, he will be punished with check and takes probably. And now, okay, with h-pawn, it looks like a draw, and probably it is a table-based draw, probably. Because this king should stay in this corner somehow, and then queen is going to hold some positional draw, or always threatening with a perpetual check. And maybe even here in this position there is some perpetual check, who knows. But some line could be even this, and now also black has his own pawn. And position is maybe better for white, yes, but also black has his own passer, and you know, big drawing chances, very good drawing chances. But nevertheless, I think that my decision was good, just to go for this, because otherwise it was not easy to fight for win. My opponent played h6, probably just waiting. Maybe he thought, okay, I will just wait and see. And this is maybe even better than actually what Kohn did against Rubinstein. Because now it's not obvious how white is going to push black back, yes? But king f4 first, of course, king e6, and h4. Now I might be ready to harass him a little bit with some moves. We'll see that later. But first thing is that I stop g5 move. If he goes g5, I might be losing my pawn on e5. Now basically I'm saying with this h4, okay, show me what you got. Play a move. And the problem for black is that he can't really just wait, because then I might just push. And if he takes, I will get some ground, and this should be winning, yes, because I'm not afraid of passer. Black can't force pass pawn. So this is good. h4, I'm asking black, okay, what are you going to play? He tries to, you know, spare some tempi. g3, I'm not in a hurry. So in these positions you need to save tempi, because if I'm not careful enough, black might even get some serious counterplay in some line like that. So g3, slowly, h5, and now a3. So now white is just winning because black doesn't have enough tempi, and also he gave the ground maybe too quickly. Now I'm threatening to simply demolish the whole king side. So probably this h5 move was not the best, but I was ready to challenge him. If he goes a5, a3, c6, I play a4, and so on. So h5, a3, c6, it looks nice, but it's not enough. a4, and now, okay, now you have to be precise. As I said, you need your active king, you need spare pawn moves, but also all that might not be enough if you're not careful and precise. You have to be very precise in pawn endgames, even if you have clear-cut win. So for example here with the move c3, this would be mistake, because then after d4, c4, I mean now black has connected passer, and that's protected pass pawn, and that's just equal. You know, I can't really do anything. So g4, the move g4 is good, and now my opponent, I mean, he doesn't have too much choice. I'm threatening gh5, so he has to take, and now I'm just taking on g6, and he's not fast enough, so he tries his best. But now queen h2, good move. This queen c4, check, and this is good technique when you have a queen against pawn on the second rank or seventh rank, depends from which side you're playing. Check here, and now he's forced to go king d1, and then I will slowly bring my king. I'll always force him to d1, and then I'll bring my king, and white wins. So black resigned. I think this was really instructive. I managed to use combine some knowledge from those classical examples. So let's move on. Now let's check one very old example from my own practice. As I said, it's very maybe of crucial importance, this transposition from some position, some middle game, or some endgame, usually some endgame, yes. So transposition to the pure pawn endgame. Usually it's done as sort of like a tool when you're going for a clear-cut win. When you're sure that you're winning, then you're sort of usually you're using it like a threat. So for example, your opponent can't exchange some piece, maybe in a rook endgame, or in some queen endgame, or in some light pieces endgame. So he can't exchange that piece, and he's forced back, or he's forced to give some concession, and this concession and that one, and then you push him back. Maybe you get some ground, maybe you get some advantage, or maybe some small positional gains. So usually that's how it's done. Usually you use it as a threat, but sometimes even straightforward transposition and clear-cut win. As I said, for that you need some knowledge, and you need timing. As Fisher said, chess is timing, and that's so true. So here I'm not claiming that this is some high quality example, but this is very instructive example, and you could see that also from some grandmaster. I have seen also some grandmaster examples where people simply after several hours of fight they simply blunder and lose. So here nothing special happens. Yes, my opponent is white. I mean, this was some very old game which was played in 1993. I was 14 years old, and okay, I was not very strong, nor my opponent. Just a game. We played in a local club, and but okay, you might say maybe it's time to give draw. But somehow I liked my bishop, and I was hoping that it will give me some edge. My opponent goes rook d1. Well, probably the easiest way is just to go rook c3 and just make draw without any problems. Probably just go rook c3, and if this, there is check, and then he can probably play some move. I don't know, king d2. Yeah, just just a draw. No big deal. Yes. But still, I mean, position is playable, but well, not too much. My opponent goes rook d1, and now, okay, now already you can feel the passivity of white pieces. Now he has problems. King f1, obviously, this also might be a draw, rook e1, and yes, of course, it should be a draw still, but obviously white doesn't feel comfortable, and especially when you have not two guys which are not very strong players. Then, and now I managed to play bishop g3. I think this example should be quite instructive, especially for those who are not very very experienced. For those of you who don't have too much endgame knowledge, this could be instructive. And maybe for some others it could be also amusing or even relatively funny. But okay, nevertheless, let's check this. f5 and bishop f4. Okay, my opponent decides that everything is fine. I give check, and now that's the problem. I will win the g2 pawn. He has to play this, and now I just come with the king. Now the problem is he's pinned, and this is what you want to do if you have if you have a lot of if you have domination, like this is sort of domination. Bishop f4, rook c2. Basically, as I said, we started with some normal looking drawish position, and now this game is really a proof that, I mean, you can almost win anything and almost lose anything. That's the case. So my opponent goes, if you want, berserk, and nobody, forced him to push g4, and now he's lost. But, he might be concerned about this little idea. King f6, king g5, king h4, king g3. You might ask me, well, come on, isn't that way too long? It takes some time. Yes, it takes some time, but, I mean, what is white going to do? Is he going to play king d3? But then I'm just waiting. And I will be, very, very patient. I will be waiting for him to remove the knight, and then I will just collect on g2. And then he might be lost. So he goes g4, but now he is just lost. King is entering, and he's still pinned down. And now my winning idea is very simple. Just exchange everything and win the pawn endgame. Just like that, yeah. King e1, okay, takes on d2, takes. And okay, now if he takes, he's going to lose the pawn endgame, obviously. Game is lost, black wins, yeah. So he plays king e3, tries, because now I can even win with this gf3, this, and okay, black has the opposition, black is winning. But okay, I played even king g5, even better idea. Now white doesn't have too much choice. He plays this, takes, king h4, easier win, and king g4, and now, okay, white resigned. So why he resigned? Why he lost this game? Obviously, it's not high quality game. He was not careful enough, and maybe he was lacking some endgame knowledge. Of course, We were both relatively, young and weak players, but nevertheless, I mean, judging only by the game, White showed some problematic, endgame knowledge, maybe a lack of endgame knowledge. So let's move on to the next example. Okay, so let's start here. You might ask again, this is not a pawn endgame. Okay, that's clear. But as I said, the most critical moment in the game is if you had pawn endgame, is transposition to the pawn endgame, because transposition to the pawn endgame might mean you're winning or you're achieving a draw. Well, if you're losing, it means that you basically did something wrong. Not to say, not to use some other expression, there are so many expressions, which you can use when something goes wrong, when you make some blunder, mistake in judgment, and so on and so on. So here, this is my game from 2005. I was white. My opponent was Gruich. He was rated around 2400, and I was also rated around 2400. And always when I say rating, it's always FIDE rating, yes, because I'm playing mostly in Europe, and I have a FIDE rating only. So okay, Rook c5. Well, you might say, what is this? I mean, white's pawn down, nothing to write home about. Yes, pawn down in this rook endgame, but basically, yes, I mean, before a few moves, ago, or some moves before this position happened on the board, black had clear advantage and he had decent winning chances. But okay, nevertheless, now we are, we will focus on the game from this position. Why? Because now black really has to, sort of be flexible, and black has to realize that he already made some wrong, decisions, and he has to be very careful. Even in this position with the pawn down, with the pawn up for black, black has to be careful, yes. Which means now many critical questions here are revolving around what is it all about, transposition to the pawn endgame. If black can make a threat, or if white can do something, that's the whole thing. And being pawn up, somehow, it looks like it's automatic thing that black is going to, benefit if he exchanges rooks and goes into the pawn endgame. It looks so logical, yes? Well, let's see what happened. So my opponent played rook b7, which is a mistake. He should just simply play here king d7. And basically, position is, still unclear. I mean, white is very active with this very strong passer and passed pawn, and this guy is not really so strong, because white has some ideas how to neutralize this guy. But now it might be a threat, because now if white tries a move like king c4, now rook c8 could be a real threat. And now white is simply, pawn down. My opponent played rook b7. Maybe he was thinking it's all the same. Check, king d7, king c5. Already here, white has very strong initiative, and black is under heavy pressure. Why? Because now white is threatening this, and if I win the a pawn, I mean, this will be very dangerous position for black. Still, he is not lost. I mean, black is under pressure now, even if he is pawn up. And that's the whole point. I mean, like Capablanca said, factor of the position is the most important thing. You know, he might even have a pawn up, even in the pawn endgame, and still losing. And you should always mind about, you know, position, a factor of the position. So here, my opponent automatically played rook c7. He thought, come on, I mean, I'm pawn up, and when I exchange rooks, I'm just pawn up, I can't lose. I don't remember if he played this too fast, but actually this is move 45, so it was not, obviously it was not time travel. Maybe it was just, you know, automatic schematic thinking, I don't know. So he played rook c7, and maybe he was just frustrated because he couldn't win the endgame with the pawn up. But let's see what happened. I mean, he just plays rook c7, and it's a terrible blunder. Now white wins. Can you believe that? White is simply winning now. And I just play king b6. Of course, before I ventured on all this, I had to foresee, you know, consequences of this rook exchange. So I had to be completely sure before going for all this that that king c5, rook c7 is good for me and bad for black. So it was just a matter of judgment. Yes, my opponent made a mistake and I was right. Well, as I said, you have to be precise. So rook c6, bc, and black is lost, just like that. I mean, king d6, c7, he can resign, and now his pawn is gone. I mean, he is simply lost now, and now we have pawn endgame on the board. Well, you might ask me now, but okay, what is this? I mean, he just blunders, he blundered, and what can we learn from this? Well, what can you learn is that you should be always careful, and you should be very, very careful and precise if there is possibility of transposition to the pawn endgame. It could be tricky sometimes, like in this example. So my opponent rated 2400, you know, made this terrible mistake, judgment mistake. So okay, king a5, black is lost, and now white has to be precise. You might say, come on, this is outside passer, outside pass pawn. It's, you know, walk in the park. But let's see. f6, this is good try. I mean, he might wait a little bit, or he might try to also make some passer. So he is trying. And a good thing always, if you're defending, is to exchange as many pawns as possible. Okay, so here, for example, if we take off all of those pawns from the board except h pawns, well, the position should be draw. If we have only pawns on h4 and h5, position is just a draw. So I have to be careful. King c5. And now, okay, my opponent played h6. If he goes for some move like e5, I might just, you know, just take and just win easily. This is easy win. Or if he goes for g5, I will just take, play g3, win some tempo, and now again, and king b5, just again I will win the pawn on e5 and then g5 and win everything. So you have to be careful. So he goes h6. Now we have another critical moment. Okay, I might say, well, I can just wait king b5, king c5, and that's also probably good enough, but you have to be precise, as I said, and I like to be, you know, to search for the best moves in those positions. And here I played h4, which is the best move, and just clear-cut win. It was not too late to go wrong with g4. g4 would be a terrible move, because after g5, now black secures a draw, because now he will have this, you know, protected passer on e5. He will push e5, and okay, this is just a draw. So h4 is winning. My opponent didn't know what to do, so he goes h5. I mean, no, this is possible line. If h5, I would win like this, and just you know, clean the king side and win the game. So my opponent tried g5, but now we go into the variation which I calculated in advance. Take everything, and g4 is good move. Zugzwang for black again, so no good moves for him. And now I just take everything and okay. Game over. Black resigned. So what we can learn from these examples? Well, we can learn that in a pawn, the critical moment in the game is when you're trying to transpose to the pawn endgame. It could be a very powerful tool, you know, when you have some endgame with not so many pieces, and you're thinking to transpose to the pawn endgame. So you can just transpose to the pawn endgame just to make a clear-cut win, or you can make some threats to your opponent, and he has to, go back or give some concessions because he could be lost in the pawn endgame. And when you enter in the pawn endgame, your king is very important. Active king, spare pawn tempi, that's all very important. And be precise, be careful. So this is the end of part 1, and I will be continuing with several more instructive examples in the next chapter. So we'll just continue soon.